Carter opened her eyes to a world that felt unfamiliar. The bright white ceiling above her was blinding, and the sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she had gotten there. Her head throbbed with a dull ache, and her body felt heavy, as though it hadn't moved in weeks. She blinked slowly, trying to piece together the fragments of her memory. The last thing she remembered was the forest, the towering trees, the earthy scent of moss, and the sharp crackle of twigs beneath her boots. She had been on an expedition, tracking endangered species deep in the wilderness. It was something she loved doing, a passion that had driven her since she was a child. But then there was pain, a sharp, searing pain, and darkness swallowing her whole. A soft voice broke through her thoughts. "Miss Carter, can you hear me?" Turned her head slightly and saw a nurse standing beside her bed. The woman's face was kind, but her eyes held a hint of concern. Tried to speak, but her throat was dry and the words wouldn't come out. The nurse quickly poured a glass of water and held it to her lips. The cool liquid soothed her parched throat, and she managed to whisper, "Where am I?" "You're in the hospital," the nurse replied gently. "You've been unconscious for a long time. Do you remember what happened?" Shook her head weakly. Everything felt hazy, like a dream slipping away. The nurse patted her hand reassuringly and said, "Don't worry, you're safe now. Your brother is on his way." As the nurse left the room, closed her eyes again, trying to make sense of the situation. How long had she been asleep? What had happened in the forest? And why did she feel such a deep emptiness inside her chest? It wasn't long before the door opened again, and a familiar voice called out. Her brother rushed to her side, his face lighting up with relief. He looked older than she remembered, with dark circles under his eyes and a few extra lines on his forehead. Forced a weak smile. "What's going on?" Pulled up a chair and sat beside her bed, taking her hand in his. "You've been in a coma for 4 months," he said softly. "The rescue team found you in the forest after you collapsed. You were protecting a wolf cub from poachers, but you got hurt in the process." His heart skipped a beat. A wolf cub. The memory came rushing back in flashes, sharp fangs, frightened golden eyes, and the sound of gunshots echoing through the trees. She had stumbled upon a group of poachers hunting wolves, and one of them had cornered a small cub. Without thinking, she had stepped in to shield it, using her body as a barrier. The next thing she knew, there was a loud crash and then nothing. "Is the cub okay?" asked, her voice trembling. Hesitated, glancing at the floor. "They don't know," he admitted. "After you passed out, the rescue team took you to safety, but they couldn't find the cub. They think it might have run off into the woods." Felt a pang of sadness. She had risked her life to save that little creature, and now she didn't even know if it had survived. "I need to go back," she said firmly. Frowned. "You just woke up. You're not strong enough yet." "I don't care," she insisted. "That cub depended on me. If there's even a chance it's still out there, I have to find it." Sighed, knowing there was no point in arguing. Had always been stubborn, especially when it came to animals. From the time she was a child, she had brought home stray cats, injured birds, and even a baby raccoon she found in the backyard. Her love for wildlife was unmatched, and once she set her mind on something, there was no stopping her. For the next few days, focused on regaining her strength. She worked with physical therapists to rebuild her muscles, which had weakened during her months of immobility. She ate every meal placed in front of her, determined to fuel her body for the journey ahead. And every night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she thought about the cub. Was it still alive? Had it grown stronger? Did it remember her? Finally, the doctors gave her permission to leave the hospital, though they warned her to take things slowly. Nodded politely, but made plans to return to the forest as soon as possible. Reluctantly agreed to accompany her, knowing it was useless to try to change her mind. On the morning of their departure, packed a small bag with essentials, water, snacks, a first aid kit, and a camera. She wanted to document everything, hoping to catch a glimpse of the cub if it truly was still out there. As they drove toward the wilderness, the landscape grew wilder and more untamed. Tall trees stretched toward the sky, their leaves rustling in the breeze. The air smelled fresh and clean, a welcome change from the sterile confines of the hospital. When they reached the area where the incident had occurred, felt a lump form in her throat. The clearing looked different now, overgrown with weeds and scattered with fallen leaves. It was hard to imagine that this was the same place where she had fought to protect the cub. She knelt down, running her fingers over the ground, searching for any sign of life. Just then, a low growl echoed through the trees. Froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Slowly, she turned her head and saw a pair of glowing amber eyes watching her from the shadows. Her breath caught in her throat as a large wolf emerged into the clearing. Its sleek fur shimmered in the sunlight, and its powerful frame commanded respect. His mind raced. Could this be the same cub she had saved all those months ago? Or was it a stranger drawn to her presence by curiosity or danger? She held her ground, refusing to show fear. The wolf took a cautious step forward, sniffing the air. Then, as if recognizing her, it lowered its head and let out a soft whine. Tears welled up in its eyes as she realized the truth. This wasn't just any wolf, it was her cub, now fully grown and thriving. Against all odds, it had survived and it still remembered her. His heart raced as she stared at the wolf standing before her. It was larger than she remembered, its sleek fur gleaming in the sunlight. The cub she had saved months ago was now a fully grown creature, powerful and majestic. Yet there was something in its eyes, something familiar, that made her believe it was the same animal she had risked her life for. The wolf tilted its head, studying her with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. Didn't move. She knew better than to make any sudden gestures. Instead, she stayed still, letting the wolf take the lead. Slowly, it stepped closer, sniffing the air around her. Its golden eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment it felt like time stood still. Stood a few feet away, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. He wanted to say something, to warn to be careful, but he held his tongue. He had seen enough wildlife documentaries to know that wolves were unpredictable, even if they seemed calm. One wrong move could turn this peaceful encounter into something dangerous. The wolf circled once, brushing its side against her leg in a gesture that surprised them both. It wasn't aggressive or fearful, it was almost affectionate. His breath caught in her throat. "It remembers me," she whispered, more to herself than to. Tentatively, she reached out her hand, palm facing downward. Wolves were known to respond better to slow, deliberate movements, and hoped this one would trust her enough to let her touch it. To everyone's amazement, the wolf didn't flinch or retreat. Instead, it leaned into her hand, allowing her fingers to graze its soft fur. Tears streamed down his face as she knelt beside the wolf, overwhelmed by emotion. This was the cub she had saved, a tiny, helpless creature trembling in fear when she first found it. Now, it was a strong, confident adult, thriving in the wild. And yet, despite the months that had passed, their bond remained unbroken. Finally spoke, his voice filled with awe. "This is incredible, I've never seen anything like it." Nodded, unable to find words. Her mind was racing with questions. How had the wolf survived on its own? Had it joined a pack, or was it living alone? Most importantly, what did this mean for their relationship now? Could she continue to play a role in its life without disrupting its natural instincts? As if sensing her thoughts, the wolf pulled back slightly, stepping away from her touch. It gave her one last lingering look before turning and disappearing into the trees. Watched it go, her heart aching with a mix of joy and sadness. She had found the cub she thought she might never see again, but she also knew that it belonged to the wild. For the rest of the day, couldn't stop thinking about the wolf. Every sound, every rustle of leaves made her glance over her shoulder, hopping to catch another glimpse of it. But the forest remained quiet, save for the occasional chirping of birds and the distant call of other animals. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, suggested they set up camp near the clearing. "You're not going to leave until you see it again, are you?" he asked with a knowing smile. Shook her head. "No, I'm not yet." They gathered firewood and built a small campfire, its warm glow casting flickering shadows across the forest floor. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and the stars began to twinkle overhead. Sat close to the flames, staring into the darkness beyond the light of the fire. Somewhere out there, the wolf was roaming free, living the life it was meant to live. "You really care about these animals, don't you?" said after a long silence. "Of course I do," replied. "They're part of this world just like us. They deserve to live without fear, without people hunting them or destroying their homes." Nodded thoughtfully. "I admire that about you. You've always been so passionate about protecting them." "It's not just about protecting them," said softly. "It's about understanding them, about realizing that we're all connected. When I saved that cub, it wasn't just an act of kindness. It was a reminder of how much we rely on each other, humans and animals alike." Smiled, though his expression was tinged with sadness. He knew how deeply cared and he admired her strength. But he also worried about her. The world wasn't always kind, and sometimes, no matter how hard you tried, things didn't work out the way you hoped. The next morning woke early, eager to explore the area further. With trailing behind her, she ventured deeper into the forest, searching for signs of the wolf. She noticed tracks in the dirt, large paw prints pressed into the soft earth, and followed them, her heart pounding with anticipation. After walking for nearly an hour, they came across a small stream. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the sound of trickling water filled the air. Crouched down, examining the ground. There, near the edge of the stream, were more tracks and something else. A tuft of fur clung to a low-hanging branch, its color matching the wolf's coat perfectly. "It's been here recently," said, excitement bubbling in her chest. "We're getting closer." Glanced around nervously. "Do you think it's safe to keep going? What if we run into its pack?" "We'll be careful," assured him. "Wolves aren't naturally aggressive toward humans unless they feel threatened. As long as we respect their space, we should be fine." Reluctantly, agreed to continue. They followed the tracks along the stream, moving quietly through the underbrush. After another 30 minutes, they reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a wide valley. From their vantage point, they could see a group of wolves lounging in the distance. "There," whispered, pointing toward the pack. Among the wolves was the one had encountered the day before. It was lying on a patch of grass, its head resting on its paws. Even from afar could tell it was the same wolf. The scar above its left ear was unmistakable. "Look at them," murmured, her voice filled with wonder. "They're so beautiful." The pack seemed relaxed, basking in the warmth of the sun. Occasionally, one of the wolves would stand up and stretch, while others played or groomed each other. It was clear that they trusted each other completely, relying on their bonds to survive in the wild. Watched silently, taking in every detail. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that the cub she had saved had found its place in the world. It was no longer alone. It was part of a family, surrounded by others who cared for it. But as she observed the pack, she also felt a pang of longing. The wolf had moved on just as it was meant to. It didn't need her anymore. Still, she couldn't help feeling grateful for the brief moments they had shared. Those encounters reminded her why she loved nature so much. The connections, the mysteries, the beauty of life unfolding in its form. Eventually, the wolves began to stir, rising to their feet and stretching their legs. One by one, they disappeared into the trees, leaving the valley empty once again. Sighed, knowing it was time to leave too. She turned to who was watching her closely. "You okay?" he asked gently. "I'm fine," replied, forcing a smile. "Let's head back." As they made their way back to the clearing, couldn't shake the image of the wolf from her mind. It was a symbol of resilience, of survival against all odds. And though their paths might never cross again, she knew she would carry the memory of their reunion with her forever. When they returned to the campsite, sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Her heart was full, but it was also heavy. She had come looking for answers, and in a way, she had found them. The cub she had saved had grown into a magnificent creature, living the life it was meant to live. That knowledge brought her comfort, even as it reminded her of the fleeting nature of their connection. Handed her a cup of tea, sitting beside her in silence. Together, they listened to the sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the distant calls of nocturnal creatures, the gentle hum of life continuing on. "It's amazing, isn't it?" said after a while, "how everything fits together." Nodded, "Yeah, it is." For the rest of the night they sat by the fire, lost in their thoughts. The forest stretched endlessly around them, vast and untamed. Somewhere out there, the wolf was running free, carrying with it the memory of the woman who had once saved its life. The next morning woke up with the first rays of sunlight filtering through the trees. The forest was alive with sound, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the distant howl of wolves echoing in the cool air. She sat up slowly, stretching her stiff muscles as she gazed around the campsite. Was still asleep, curled up in his sleeping bag near the dying embers of the fire, smiled faintly at the sight of him before turning her attention back to the wilderness. Her mind kept drifting to the wolf. She couldn't stop thinking about the way it had looked at her the day before, those golden eyes filled with recognition and trust. It was as if the months they had spent apart didn't matter, as if their bond had never weakened, but knew better than to assume that everything would stay the same. The wolf was no longer a cub. It was a fully grown animal with instincts that guided its every move. She couldn't expect it to behave like a pet or cling to her forever. Still, she hoped for one more encounter, one last chance to see it again. After packing up their things and decided to explore the area further, they followed the stream deeper into the forest, staying alert for any signs of wildlife. The trail was narrow and uneven, forcing them to step carefully over roots and rocks. Along the way, noticed fresh paw prints in the mud, confirming that the pack had passed through recently. Her heart skipped a beat, but she tried to stay calm. "They're close," she whispered to, who nodded silently. As they walked, couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the forest. The trees towered above them, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft patches on the ground. Wildflowers bloomed along the edges of the path, adding splashes of color to the green landscape. It was easy to forget the dangers lurking in such a place when everything seemed so peaceful. But knew better. Nature was unpredictable, and even the most beautiful places could hide threats. After an hour of walking, they came across a clearing bathed in golden light. In the center of the clearing stood the wolf. It was alone this time, its powerful frame silhouetted against the bright sky. Its breath caught in her throat as she froze in place. The wolf turned its head, locking eyes with her. For a moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, the wolf began to approach. Tense beside her, gripping his backpack strapped tightly. He started, his voice low and cautious. "It's okay," she murmured without taking her eyes off the wolf. "Stay still." The wolf stopped a few feet away, its ears pricked forward and its tail held steady. It sniffed the air, studying them carefully. Felt her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to remain calm. Slowly, she knelt down, lowering herself to the wolf's level. She extended her hand, palm facing outward, just as she had done before. To her relief, the wolf didn't retreat. Instead, it stepped closer, brushing its nose against her fingertips. Its eyes filled with tears as she realized the truth. It really did remember her. Against all odds, the bond they had formed months ago was still intact. For several minutes they stayed like that, the wolf standing beside her while watched from a safe distance. Gently stroked its fur, marveling at how soft it felt beneath her fingers. The wolf let out a low whine, almost like a sigh, before stepping back slightly. It circled her once, then sat down on its haunches, watching her intently. "What does it want?" asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," admitted, "but I think it's trying to tell me something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small piece of dried meat she had brought along as a snack. Holding it out cautiously, she offered it to the wolf. At first, the wolf hesitated, sniffing the air around the food. Then, after a moment, it leaned forward and took the meat from her hand, chewing it slowly. smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. This wasn't just any wild animal, it was the cub she had saved, now grown into a magnificent creature. And yet, despite the changes, it still trusted her enough to accept her offering. After finishing the meat, the wolf stood up and began packing back and forth, glancing between and the trees beyond the clearing. It seemed restless, as if it was trying to communicate something important. Frowned, unsure what to make of its behavior. "Do you think it wants us to follow it?" she asked. "It's possible," replied, though his tone was skeptical. "But we should be careful. Wolves are unpredictable." "I know," said firmly, "but I have to try." Without waiting for his response, she stood up and took a step forward, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. The wolf paused, watching her closely. When she didn't stop, it turned and began trotting toward the edge of the clearing, glancing over its shoulder to make sure she was following. Exchanged a quick look with, who sighed but nodded reluctantly. Together, they trailed behind the wolf, staying a safe distance away as it led them deeper into the forest. The terrain grew rougher, with thick underbrush and steep inclines making the journey more challenging, but didn't complain. She was determined to see where the wolf was taking her, no matter how difficult the path became. After nearly half an hour, they arrived at a rocky slope overlooking a dense thicket. The wolf stopped at the top of the slope, looking down into the thicket below. Followed its gaze, squinting to see what had caught its attention. At first, she didn't notice anything unusual. But then, she spotted movement, a flash of gray fur disappearing into the shadows. "There's another wolf down there," she whispered, pointing toward the thicket. Nodded, scanning the area carefully. "It looks injured," he observed. "See how it's limping." His heart sank as she realized what the wolf was trying to show her. It had brought her here to help. Without hesitation, she started climbing down the slope, ignoring his protests. The injured wolf was lying on the ground, its breathing shallow and labored. Blood stained its fur, and its eyes were half closed, clouded with pain. "Stay back," instructed as she approached the wounded animal. "I don't want to scare it." Kneeling beside the wolf, examined its injuries carefully. A deep gash ran along its side, likely caused by a fight or an encounter with a predator. She opened her backpack and pulled out the first aid kit she had brought along. Using antiseptic wipes and bandages, she cleaned the wound as best she could, speaking softly to the wolf the entire time. "You're going to be okay," she murmured, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "Just hold still." The injured wolf whimpered but didn't resist. Worked quickly, wrapping the wound tightly to stop the bleeding. Once she was finished, she sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. The wolf's breathing had steadied slightly, and its eyes fluttered open, meeting hers briefly before closing again. Behind her, the other wolf watched silently, its posture relaxed. Glanced at it, realizing the significance of what had just happened. The wolf hadn't only remembered her, it had trusted her enough to lead her to its injured companion. It was a gesture of faith, a testament to the bond they shared. Joined her a few moments later, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're incredible, you know that," he said, his voice filled with admiration. Shrugged modestly. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," corrected her. "Not everyone would risk their life for an animal. You have a gift, a real connection with these creatures." Didn't respond. She simply turned her attention back to the injured wolf, stroking its fur gently. The other wolf came closer, lying down beside its companion protectively. Watching them together, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had come to the forest searching for answers, and in a way, she had found them. The cub she had saved had grown into a leader, caring for others in need just as she had cared for it. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, and made their way back to the clearing, the two wolves remained behind, resting side by side in the safety of the thicket. Glanced over her shoulder one last time, committing the image to memory. She knew she might never see them again, but she also knew that their bond would always remain. That night, as they sat by the fire, reflected on everything that had happened. The forest was quiet except for the crackling of the flames and the occasional hoot of an owl. Handed her a cup of tea, sitting beside her in silence. "You've changed, you know," he said after a while. "Since you woke up from the coma, you seem stronger somehow." Smiled faintly. "Maybe I am, or maybe I just needed a reminder of why I love doing this." Nodded thoughtfully. "Do you think you'll keep coming back here to check on them?" "I don't know," admitted, "but I'll always carry them with me, no matter where I go." For the rest of the night they sat by the fire, lost in their thoughts. The forest stretched endlessly around them, vast and untamed. Somewhere out there, the wolves were running free, carrying with them the memory of the woman who had once saved their lives. The days that followed were a blur of activity for her. She spent most of her time exploring the forest, retracing her steps to the places where she had seen the wolves. Each visit deepened her connection to the wilderness and reminded her of why she loved it so much. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the earthy scent of damp leaves and pine needles. Birds sang in the treetops, and the gentle rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush added to the symphony of sounds around her. Every morning woke up early, eager to return to the clearing where she had last seen the wolves. She carried a notebook with her, jotting down observations about their behavior, their movements, and the subtle ways they communicated with each other. Sometimes she would catch a glimpse of them in the distance, two sleek figures darting between the trees or resting on a patch of sunlit grass. Other times they remained hidden, leaving only paw prints or tufts of fur as evidence of their presence. Accompanied her on some of these trips, though he often stayed near the edges of the forest, letting venture deeper on her own. He admired her dedication but couldn't shake the feeling of unease that came with being so close to wild animals. "You're braver than I am," he told her one evening as they sat by the campfire. "I don't know how you do it." "It's not bravery," replied softly. "It's trust. They know I'm not here to hurt them." Her words stayed with long after the fire died down. He watched her interact with the wolves, noticing the way they seemed to recognize her even from afar. It was as if they shared a language, a silent understanding that transcended words. He had never seen anything like it before, and it left him in awe of his sister's unique bond with the natural world. One afternoon, as wandered through the forest, she stumbled upon something unexpected. Hidden among the roots of an ancient oak tree was a collection of objects, an old scarf, a crumpled piece of paper, and a small leather bracelet. At first, she thought they might belong to another hiker or researcher who had passed through the area, but then she noticed something familiar about the scarf. It was hers, the same one she had been wearing the day she collapsed in the forest months ago. Knelt down, picking up the items one by one. Her hands trembled as she examined the scarf, now frayed and faded from exposure to the elements. How had it ended up here? Had the wolves brought it to this spot? If so, why? She sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of what she had found. The scarf wasn't just a piece of fabric. It was a symbol of her journey, a reminder of the day she had risked everything to save the cub. And now, it felt like the wolves were returning the favor, leaving behind a token of gratitude. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized the significance of the gesture. Wolves weren't known for collecting human belongings. Their instincts drove them to focus on survival, not sentimentality. Yet somehow, these wolves had gone out of their way to preserve a part of her. It was as if they wanted her to know that they hadn't forgotten her, that they still remembered the woman who had once saved one of their own. When she returned to the campsite that evening, showed the items too, explaining where she had found them. His reaction mirrored her own surprise. "Do you think they did this on purpose?" he asked, holding the scarf gently. "I don't know," admitted, "but it feels like they did, like they're trying to say thank you." Shook his head in disbelief. "This is incredible. You've created something truly special here." The discovery gave a renewed sense of purpose. She began documenting her experiences more thoroughly, writing detailed accounts of her encounters with the wolves and taking photographs whenever possible. Her notes described not only the animals themselves, but also the emotions she felt during each interaction. The joy, the sadness, the profound sense of connection. She wanted to share her story with others, to inspire people to care about wildlife and the fragile ecosystems they inhabited. As word of her work spread, started receiving messages from people all over the country. Some were fellow nature enthusiasts who admired her dedication. Others were curious strangers asking questions about her experiences. A local wildlife organization even reached out, inviting her to speak at an upcoming event about conservation efforts in the region. At first, hesitated. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and the idea of sharing her story publicly made her nervous, but encouraged her to take the opportunity. "This is your chance to make a difference," he said. "Think about how many people you could inspire." Eventually agreed. She spent hours preparing for the talk, organizing her thoughts and practicing what she wanted to say. When the day finally arrived, she stood nervously at the podium, staring out at the crowd gathered before her. For a moment, she doubted herself, wondering if anyone would care about her story. But then she took a deep breath, remembering the wolves and the lessons they had taught her. "I didn't set out to change the world," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I just wanted to help one small creature survive. But along the way, I learned something important, that every life matters, no matter how big or small. That we all have a role to play in protecting the world we share." The audience listened intently as she spoke, hanging on her every word. She shared stories about the wolves, describing their intelligence, their loyalty, and their resilience. She talked about the bond she had formed with them and the impact it had on her life. By the time she finished, the room erupted into applause, and several people approached her afterward to express their admiration. For the experience was both humbling and empowering. She realized that her story wasn't just about her. It was about the power of compassion and the importance of preserving the natural world. The wolves had given her a gift, and now she was determined to use it to make a difference. In the weeks that followed, continued visiting the forest, spending hours observing the wolves from a distance. They seemed to thrive in her absence, living free and independent lives. Occasionally, she would catch a glimpse of the wolf she had saved, its golden eyes meeting hers briefly before it disappeared into the trees. Each encounter filled her with gratitude, reminding her of how far they had both come. One evening, as she sat by the stream watching the sun dip below the horizon, reflected on everything that had happened. The forest was quiet except for the sound of water trickling over rocks and the occasional call of a bird settling in for the night. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that she had done everything she could to protect the wolves and their home. But she also knew that her time in the forest was limited. Winter was approaching, and the wolves would soon move to higher ground in search of food and shelter. As much as she wanted to stay, she understood that her presence might disrupt their natural rhythms. Nature had its own rules, and she respected them. That night, as she packed up her things and prepared to leave the campsite for the last time, felt a mix of emotions. She was proud of what she had accomplished, but she also felt a pang of sadness knowing that she might never see the wolves again. Still, she held on to the memories they had shared, the moments of connection, the acts of trust, the unspoken bond that had grown between them. Joined her by the fire, handing her a cup of tea. "Are you ready to go?" he asked gently. Nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, it's time." As they walked back to the car, glanced over her shoulder one last time. The forest stretched endlessly behind her, vast and untamed. Somewhere out there, the wolves were running free, carrying with them the memory of the woman who had once saved their lives. "You'll come back, won't you?" asked as they drove away. "Of course," replied, her voice filled with determination. "This isn't goodbye, it's just until next time." And with that, she turned her attention to the road ahead, knowing that her journey was far from over. Winter arrived sooner than expected, blanketing the forest in a thick layer of snow. The trees stood tall and bare, their branches heavy with frost. The air was sharp and cold, biting at anyone who dared to venture outside, watched from her window as the world transformed into a quiet, frozen landscape. It had been weeks since she last visited the forest, and though she tried to focus on other things, writing articles, giving talks, volunteering at wildlife shelters, her thoughts often drifted back to the wolves. She missed them more than she cared to admit. The bond she had formed with the wolf she saved was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't just about saving a life. It was about understanding, trust, and mutual respect. Those moments in the forest had changed her in ways she couldn't fully explain. She felt connected to something larger than herself, a delicate web of life that stretched far beyond human comprehension. But winter made travel difficult, especially to remote areas like the one where the wolves lived. Heavy snowfall blocked trails, and icy winds chilled even the warmest clothing. Knew it was safer to stay home, but her heart ached for the wilderness. She spent hours looking at the photographs she had taken during her visits, studying the wolves' expressions and movements. Each image reminded her of their strength, their beauty, and their resilience. One morning, as she sipped her coffee and stared out at the snow-covered yard, decided she couldn't wait any longer. She needed to see the forest again, even if only for a short while. Noticed her restlessness and offered to come along. "You shouldn't go alone," he said firmly. "It's too dangerous." Smiled gratefully. "Thanks, I'd appreciate the company." They packed their gear carefully, layering warm clothes and bringing extra supplies in case they got stuck. The drive to the forest was slow and treacherous, with icy roads forcing them to take their time. By the time they reached the edge of the woods, the sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the snow. The temperature dropped quickly and pulled her scarf around her neck. The forest looked different under its blanket of white. The usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves were replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the crunch of snow beneath their boots. Every step felt heavier, the cold seeping through their shoes despite the thick socks they wore. Still, pressed on, determined to reach the clearing where she had last seen the wolves. When they finally arrived, the scene was hauntingly beautiful. The clearing sparkled in the moonlight, the snow shimmering like diamonds. But there was no sign of the wolves. No paw prints marred the pristine surface, no distant howls echoed through the trees. Felt a pang of disappointment, but reminded herself that the wolves had likely moved to higher ground, following prey or seeking shelter from the harsh weather. "We should head back soon," said, his breath visible in the freezing air. "It's getting dark, and we don't want to get caught out here overnight." "I know," replied softly. "Just give me a few more minutes." She wandered to the center of the clearing, gazing up at the star-filled sky. The stars seemed brighter here, untouched by city lights. She closed her eyes, letting the stillness wash over her. For a moment she could almost hear the wolves' voices, their soft whines and low growls, as if they were standing beside her. Then, without warning, a sound broke the silence. It was faint at first, barely audible over the wind, but it grew louder with each passing second. A single howl pierced the night, followed by another and then another. His heart raced as she turned toward the source of the noise. Through the trees, glowing amber eyes appeared, reflecting the moonlight. The wolves emerged slowly, their sleek forms blending seamlessly with the snowy backdrop. There were 3 of them now, including the one had saved. They moved cautiously, sniffing the air before stepping into the clearing. Froze, unsure whether to stay or retreat, but the wolves didn't seem alarmed. Instead, they approached her, their movements deliberate and unhurried. The wolf she had saved stopped a few feet away, tilting its head as it studied her. Its golden eyes locked onto hers, filled with a mixture of curiosity and recognition. Knelt down, lowering herself to its level. Slowly, she extended her hand, palm facing outward. The wolf hesitated for a moment before stepping closer, brushing its nose against her fingers. Tears streamed down its face as she realized the truth. It still remembered her. Despite the months that had passed, despite the challenges of winter and survival, their bond remained unbroken. She stroked its fur gently, marveling at how soft it felt beneath her gloved hand. The other wolves circled her cautiously, watching her every move but keeping their distance. Stood nearby, his expression a mix of awe and concern. "This is incredible," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I've never seen anything like it." Nodded, unable to find words. Her heart swelled with gratitude, not just for the wolves but for the lessons they had taught her. They reminded her of the importance of trust, of patience, of living in harmony with the natural world. In their presence, she felt small yet significant, part of something greater than herself. After several minutes, the wolves began to retreat, melting back into the shadows as quietly as they had come. Watched them go, her chest tight with emotion. She knew this might be the last time she saw them, at least for a while. Winter was unforgiving, and the wolves would need to focus on survival in the coming months. As they walked back to the car, felt a strange sense of peace. She had come to the forest searching for closure, and in a way, she had found it. The wolves had shown her that some connections transcend time and distance, remaining strong even when circumstances change. That night as they drove home, glanced at her. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Smiled though her eyes were still wet with tears. "I'm fine, better than fine actually." "What will you do now?" asked. "Will you keep writing, speaking, helping animals?" "All of the above," replied firmly. "But more importantly, I'll keep remembering what it means to care, to protect, to connect. That's what the wolves taught me." Nodded, smiling faintly. "You've always been amazing at that. You inspire people without even trying." Shook her head modestly. "It's not about me. It's about them, the wolves, the forests, the entire ecosystem. We're all connected, whether we realize it or not." When they finally arrived home, unpacked her gear and sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames. Her body was tired, but her mind was alive with thoughts. She thought about the wolves, their golden eyes shining in the darkness. She thought about the forest, its beauty and mystery stretching endlessly before her. And she thought about the future, knowing that her journey was far from over. Over the next few weeks, poured her energy into her work. She wrote articles about conservation efforts, shared her story with schools and community groups, and volunteered at local shelters. Her experiences in the forest became a source of inspiration for others, encouraging them to care about the environment and the creatures that called it home. But no matter how busy she got, always found time to reflect on her encounters with the wolves. She kept the scarf and the other items she had found tucked safely in a box, reminders of the bond she had formed. Occasionally, she would take them out and hold them close, feeling a sense of comfort and connection. Spring eventually arrived, melting the snow and bringing new life to the forest. Birds returned to the trees, flowers bloomed in the meadows, and the streams flowed freely once again. Knew the wolves would return to the lower grounds, resuming their routines as the weather warmed. She hoped to visit them again someday, to catch another glimpse of the wolf she had saved. But for now, she was content to let them live their lives in peace. They had given her so much, a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper appreciation for nature, and a memory she would cherish forever. And though they were miles apart, she knew their bond would endure, surviving the test of time and distance. As she stood on her porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The world was vast and unpredictable, full of challenges and wonders alike. But somewhere out there, beneath the endless expanse of stars, the wolves ran free, carrying with them the memory of the woman who had once saved their lives. And in her heart carried them too,